I was checking my mailbox when a filed notice slapped me awake. Karen claimed my lakeside fence violated HOA access control. She marched across my porch, waving a posted order like a weapon saying I owed her board $80,000 for Shoreline use. So, I pulled out the deed my father left me. One line on that old plat map proved the entire shoreline was mine and everything shifted. "Not today, Karen," I said. Finally, someone fought back. The knock on my door came at 7:12 a.m., too early for visitors too loud to be friendly. I still had half a cup of coffee when I opened it and found Karen Whitmore, HOA Vice President, standing on my porch like she'd been waiting all morning for me to wake up. "Morning, Mike," she said. "We need to discuss your lake access." What I asked. She lifted a laminated sheet from her clipboard and held it at chest height so I couldn't miss the bold print across the top. Access fee invoice, $80,000. I blinked. This can't be real." "It's very real," Karen replied, voice cool as the fog rolling off Lake Heron. "You've been using HOA-managed Shoreline without paying your portion. Past usage plus future rights totals $80,000. $80,000, I repeated, for access to my own backyard." Her smile tightened. "Shoreline isn't your backyard. The HOA owns all waterfront access. You've used an exclusive path for years. This simply formalizes what you owe. Mini, Cliff number 1, 250 words. My grip tightened around the invoice. For a second, the morning went silent like even the lake was holding its breath. I forced a laugh. "Karen, the path behind my house has been there since the 70s. It was part of the property when I bought it." "It was near your property," she corrected, "not on it, and using HOA Shoreline requires a fee." I stepped out onto the porch. Mist drifted off the water, pale and cold. "Then show me the rule. Show me where the HOA owns the shoreline." "You can schedule an appointment to review our internal maps," she said. "But Wallace has already signed off on this assessment." "He's the HOA president," I said. "Not the county, not the state. You can't just—" Karen raised an eyebrow. "We can file a lien if necessary." That hit harder than the invoice. "A lien. Over walking to the water, if you prefer not to pay in full," she said calmly. "A lien secures the debt. Perfectly standard." Behind her, a screen door squeaked. Old Mr. Dwyer from next door shuffled toward his mailbox, pretending not to stare. But he was absolutely staring. I lowered my voice. "Karen, I bought this house because of the shoreline. The listing said private water access. You're trying to rewrite the property line." "No," she said, "I'm enforcing it." Mini, Cliff number 2, 450 words. The invoice crinkled in my hand. Assessment, amount $80,000, due in 30 days. At the bottom, a line I'd never seen before. County records defer to HOA usage guidelines. That smelled wrong, like someone had typed it in last week. I said I never agreed to this. "You acknowledged HOA authority at closing. I acknowledged trash pickup schedules and paint colors I shot back. Not an $80,000 shoreline tax." Karen took a step closer, her perfume cutting through the lake air. "If you want to avoid escalation, start a payment plan. We can be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I held up the invoice. "This is a shakedown." Her expression didn't change. "Everyone pays for what they use. You have the longest shoreline here. It's only fair." I laughed sharp. "There's nothing fair about this. I'm sorry you feel that way," she said clearly, not sorry. But the board voted unanimously. I glanced toward the lake. My dock sat quiet under the rising sun exactly where my dad had built it decades ago. He'd told me once, "This shoreline is Harperland. Don't let anyone tell you different." I'd never questioned it. Not until now. Karen tapped the clipboard. "Sign the bottom and I'll update your file. I'm not signing anything." Her smile sharpened. "Then the next notice won't be hand-delivered." She pivoted on her heel and walked down my steps like she owned them, brushing past Dwyer, who mumbled something that sounded like, "Lord help us." When she finally disappeared down the block, he hobbled over. "What's she after this time?" he asked. I handed him the invoice. He squinted. $80,000 for breathing near the lake. She says the HOA owns the shoreline. He snorted. Your father would have laughed her off the property. Did he ever mention anything about the boundary all the time? Dwyer said. Said your family line ran straight to the water. Showed me a map once. Big red line. My pulse kicked. That map's still in my garage. Then go look, he said, before she leans your house. I didn't need more encouragement. I crossed the yard, shoved open the garage door, and the alarm chirped beep as I stepped inside. The smell of oil and sawdust wrapped around me. On the back wall behind my father's old tool bench hung the framed property survey. I flicked the light switch. The fluorescent bulb buzzed, hesitated, then snapped on. The red boundary line ran from the street down the side yard and hugged the shoreline all the way around the curve of the cove, Min Cliff, number 3. 750 words. Everything, Karen said, suddenly felt like a bluff. I grabbed my phone and dialed the county recorder's office. A clerk answered the sound of typing faint behind him. I'm looking at my survey, I said. It shows I own the shoreline. The HOA says they do. Typing stopped. Bring your documents in, he said. Something's off. Off how? We'll talk here, he said. Don't rely on what your HOA tells you. I looked at the red line again, glowing under the garage light. For the first time all morning, outrage sharpened into resolve. If Karen wanted to fight over shoreline access, she was about to find out she'd picked the wrong boundary. The county recorder's office smelled like old paper and dust that had given up fighting. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead a steady, tired buzz. A scanner chirped every few seconds from behind the counter, click whir, beep, like the building itself was on life support. I held my father's survey map in one hand and the HOA invoice in the other, the red boundary line and the $80,000 figure burning twin holes in my brain. A man in his 40s with rolled-up sleeves and a county badge stepped up to the counter. His nameplate said, R. Ramirez. You Harper? He asked. Yeah, Mike Harper. He nodded once. You called about shoreline ownership. Let's take a look. He gestured me through a side gate. The magnetic lock clicked open, and I followed him past low cubicles stacked with file boxes and binders that probably hadn't moved since the Reagan administration. Set it here, he said, tapping a big, scarred wooden table. I laid the survey down. The old paper crackled under my fingers. Ramirez leaned over it, tracing the red line with his eyes, then with one blunt fingertip. This is the original survey from when your dad bought the place he asked. Pretty sure. He framed it and hung it in the garage the day we moved in. Said, this is the only map that matters. Ramirez grunted, like that matched something he already believed. All right, let's see what the county has on file. He walked to a wall of gray cabinets and started pulling out drawers. They rattled on their rails, metal grinding softly. He flipped through folders, lips moving as he read lot numbers. Harper, Lake Heron Subdivision. Here we go. He slid a thick manila folder free and slapped it onto the table next to my map. Inside were yellowing copies of deeds, survey plats, handwritten notes in careful ink from the 1950s. He smoothed one sheet out and squinted. Original subdivision map. See this? He pointed at a neat black line that matched the curve of the cove. Lot 17. Harper. Boundary extends to the waterline, so the property goes all the way to the lake, I said. According to this, yes. He flipped to another page. And here. He hesitated, then turned the paper so I could read it. In the middle, in slightly darker ink, were the words, Shoreline rights retained by original owner's estate. My throat went dry. Retained, I repeated, as in, not transferred to the HOA, as in, still tied to the Harper title unless something changed later, Ramirez said. That's what this is saying. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Deeds don't lie. People do, I muttered. He gave me a quick sideways look. You'd be surprised how often that's the truth. For a moment I just stood there, hand resting on the edge of the old map. The paper was cool and slightly rough. My fingers trembled against it. All the power the HOA had tried to project the threats, the lean talk suddenly felt hollow compared to the weight of decades-old ink. Then the door to the public lobby opened with a hiss and heels clicked sharply against the linoleum. "Excuse me," a familiar voice called. I was told a resident was reviewing Shoreline records without HOA representation. My shoulders tightened. Karen. She appeared at the edge of the county workspace like she belonged there. Blazer, immaculate hair, perfect, HOA badge clipped just a little too high on her lapel. Ramirez straightened. "Ma'am, this area is for staff and authorized visitors only." "I am authorized," she said. "I'm vice president of the Lake Heron HOA. Our covenants control the shoreline." "That's what he's trying to dispute." She aimed her chin at me like she was pointing a weapon. "I'm trying to find out who actually owns it," I said. "And I'm here to make sure county staff doesn't mislead you," she shot back. Ramirez's expression didn't change. "I don't work for your HOAMs. Whitmore," she said crisply. "Karen Whitmore." He nodded once. "Well, Ms. Whitmore, this is a county records issue, not an HOA meeting." She took a step closer, eyes flicking over the papers. "Those are outdated plats. Our association has newer maps. Updated jurisdiction. The board voted on it." "That's not how property law works," Ramirez said. "You can't vote yourself land you never legally received." Karen's smile thinned. "We have documentation. And I have the original deed and subdivision map." He tapped the page with the shoreline rights language. "Right now, the law is on this side of the table." Her gaze snapped to the line of text. I watched her read it, watched the exact moment she hit the words retained by original owner's estate. A tiny muscle jumped in her jaw. "That language is meaningless without updated filings," she said. "We have covenants, usage guidelines. His house is in our association. That means our rules control everything." "HOA rules can't override a recorded deed," Ramirez answered calmly. "At best, they sit alongside it. At worst, they're invalid." In this case, he flipped another page, pulled out a certified copy with a county stamp from the late 70s. "In this case, there's a reaffirmation of shoreline rights to the Harper title. There's no corresponding transfer to the HOA on file." "So what does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Ramirez said, looking at me instead of her, "your deed overrides HOA rules when it comes to that shoreline. If this holds up, and right now it does, you don't owe them anything for access." Hope flared so fast it almost hurt. Right behind it came a rush of anger. All the nights I'd sat at my kitchen table imagining losing the house, all because Karen waved a piece of paper with HOA at the top. Karen's voice cut through it. "You're overstepping, Mr. Ramirez, was it? You're giving legal advice. This resident is bound by our covenants. If he uses that shoreline without paying, we will enforce the fee." There it was again. "We will enforce the fee," like she was a court, not a neighbor with a clipboard. Ramirez looked at her for a long moment, then turned back to me. "Bring copies of everything you've got," he said. "Survey deed any amendments. I'll certify what matches our records. If they try to push this, you're going to want a clean paper trail." I nodded. "So, you're saying I should fight it?" He gave a short, tired smile. "I'm saying you're in the right. Don't let them scare you out of what the record says you own." Karen inhaled sharply. "This isn't over, Mike. The board will hear about this." "Good," I said. "So will the county." She spun on her heel and strode out. Heels snapping against the floor, the scanner beeping cheerfully behind her like it hadn't just witnessed a power shift. I looked down at the line on the map again, bright red under the fluorescent lights encircling the cove like a promise. For the first time since the $80,000 invoice landed in my hands, I didn't just feel angry. I felt armed with the one thing Karen couldn't vote away. The envelope was thicker this time, the kind of thick that meant bad news. It sat alone in my mailbox, cream-colored with the Riverside at Lake Heron logo in dark blue and official notice stamped just below. I didn't even wait to get inside. I tore it open on the walk up to my porch. Final notice. Shoreline. Access. Fee. Amount, due, $80,000 due. Date, 10 days from receipt. There was more legalese underneath, but my eyes caught on one line in particular. Failure to remit payment may result in placement of a lien on your property. My stomach dropped. 10 days. They'd gone from, "We can talk about a payment plan," to "nice house shame if something happened to it in a week." The phone number at the bottom was the same as before. HOA office. And just beneath it in Wallace's tidy signature, this assessment has been approved by the board of directors. I crumpled the edge of the letter in my fist. Part of me wanted to march over to Karen's house and shove it under her door. Instead, I pulled out my phone and checked the calendar. There, highlighted in green, sat tonight's entry, HOA monthly meeting, 7 Huzru p.m. Community clubhouse perfect. By 7, the clubhouse smelled like old coffee and older wood. Folding chairs lined up in neat rows faced a long table where Wallace and 3 board members sat. A corkboard on the side wall was layered with flyers Lost Cat Community Barbecue reminder about Halloween decorations. I slipped into a seat near the middle. A few heads turned. A couple of neighbors nodded politely. Most pretended not to notice me at all. Karen stood at the end of the table in a navy blazer, flipping through a stack of papers. When she spotted me, her eyes held me for a beat too long, then slid away like I was a minor annoyance. Wallace tapped his gavel. "Let's come to order. We'll start with landscaping, move to budget items, then address new business." The basics rolled by: trees trimmed, snowplow contractor, someone's trash can rule. My mind barely tracked any of it. The final notice letter sat folded in my pocket edges, digging into my palm. Finally, Wallace cleared his throat. Next item, shoreline usage. Karen. She rose slowly, with the practiced ease of someone who liked having a room's attention. "We have a resident," she began, "who has been using a section of the association's common shoreline as if it were private property. For years." A few heads turned. Some glanced back at me. My jaw tightened. "This resident," she continued, "has refused a reasonable access fee designed to keep things fair for everyone. Instead, he's chosen to challenge the HOA's authority, and now—" She spread her hands. "We've had to escalate." I stood. "Say my name." "Karen. You brought this to a public meeting." "You can use my name." "Mike," she said smoothly, "is using common shoreline without paying a dime. Everyone else here respects the rules. He thinks he's above them." I stepped into the aisle. "I went to the county," I said. "Their records show my property line goes to the water. They found a note about shoreline rights retained by the original owner's estate. It's in my deed." Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen's smile hardened. "Outdated paperwork. Our covenants supersede those old notations. We maintain the shoreline. We control access. You are benefiting from what we pay to preserve." I pulled a photo from my pocket, my phone screen printed out at the drugstore. Ramirez had let me snap a picture of the old map. I held it up. "This is the original subdivision plat I said, county stamped. It shows my lot line running to the water. That's not common shoreline. That's my land. You don't get to bill me $80,000 for walking on it." Wallace shifted uncomfortably. "We'll need to review that with our own documentation." Karen cut in. "Which we have done. Our maps are current. His are sentimental. At the end of the day, Mike only owns what we let him use." The room went quiet. There it was. Not even sugar-coated. You only own what we let you use. I scanned the faces in the chairs. Some looked confused. Others avoided my eyes entirely. A few nodded along with Karen, not because they understood, but because she'd been on the board for years and I was just the guy with the dock. I felt the isolation close and heavy as the wood-paneled walls. "HOA power isn't law," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Not unless you let it be. And I'm done letting it be." Karen's lips thinned. "You're welcome to hire a lawyer and waste everyone's time. In the meantime, the fee stands. The final notice has gone out. 10 days. Wallace cleared his throat. "This isn't the place to argue legal interpretation. The board." "Then what is this?" I snapped. "You invite the entire neighborhood, accuse me of freeloading, and when I show you county records, you call them sentimental." A couple of people shifted in their seats. Someone in the back muttered, "80,000 is a lot." Karen shot a glare in that direction. "The amount reflects years of unpaid access on premium shoreline. If we let one person slide, we undermine the integrity of the entire association. Or, I said, you undermine it by grabbing what isn't yours." The tension in the room knotted tighter. Wallace finally tapped his gavel again. We'll table this. The board will review additional documentation from both sides and reconvene. That's not good enough, I said. For tonight, it is, he replied. Karen sat arranging her papers with tiny, victorious movements. The message was clear. They had the room. I had a photograph and a gut feeling I was right. When the meeting adjourned, people filtered out in clusters talking in low voices. A few gave me sympathetic looks. No one stopped, except Dwyer. He shuffled up beside me near the coffee urn, his cane ticking softly against the tile. She got you good in there, he said quietly. She's got the board, I answered. Feels like that's the same thing. He glanced toward the door where Karen was laughing with Wallace. Your dad used to say committees are just loud rooms until paper walks in. I brought paper, I said, lifting the photo. They don't care. Maybe you brought the wrong paper. He leaned closer. Your father mentioned something years back. A rider on the deed. Amendment of some sort. Said it was the real shield if the HOA ever overreached. I frowned. He never showed it to me. He showed it to me once, Dwyer said. Said, if they ever try to bully my kid over this shoreline, this is what stops them. I stared at him. You're telling me there's a forgotten amendment floating around out there? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, old brass key, the kind banks used before everything went digital. He pressed it into my hand. Safe deposit box down at First County Bank, he said. He asked me to keep this when his health went south. Said if the HOA ever started pulling stunts, you'd know when to ask. My fingers closed around the key. It felt heavier than it looked. What's in the box? I asked. Best I remember, Dwyer said. Copies, deeds, something with the word Shoreline underlined so hard the paper almost tore. He looked me dead in the eye. Check the amendment before she buries you, Mike. The safe deposit box was smaller than I expected, old brass hinges, a number plate worn down by decades of fingers turning the key. When I opened it, a thin puff of dust lifted like a sigh. Inside sat a single envelope, the color of dried bone, sealed with a strip of brittle tape and marked in my father's handwriting. Harper Amendment, Private Shoreline. I didn't open it there. Somehow it felt wrong to tear into something he had guarded so carefully while standing in a fluorescent bank vault. Instead, I tucked it under my arm, nodded to the clerk, and drove home with both hands tight on the wheel. By the time I reached my kitchen, the sun had slipped behind the ridge, leaving the room in a narrow pool of yellow from the overhead lamp. I laid the envelope on the table like it might break if I touched it too quickly. Dwyer sat across from me, hat in his hands. Go on, he said. He meant for you to read it. I slid a finger under the tape. It gave way with a soft tear. Inside were several sheets folded carefully together, carbon copies, county stamps, brittle edges. The top page stopped my breath. Shoreline shall remain in the Harper title. 6 words underlined twice in my father's bold pen. Below them a notation signed by a county officer from 1978. Another page referenced a boundary reaffirmation, each line tying the shoreline to Lot 17. No exceptions, no transfers, no permissions required. I spread the amendment beside the county map Ramirez had shown me and pulled out my deed from the manila folder Ramirez insisted I bring home. The 3 documents lay in a row like puzzle pieces that had finally found their proper order. Every line matched. Every boundary traced the same curve of the cove. Every clause pointed to one conclusion: my family owned the entire shoreline outright. Not shared, not conditional, not subject to HOA interpretation. My pulse hammered. For weeks, Karen had been waving invoices and threats claiming authority she didn't have, maybe never had. I picked up the amendment again. He knew I said quietly. Dad knew this mattered. Dwyer nodded. He said the HOA talked about expanding jurisdiction in the 80s. He told me, if they ever try to bully my boy, give him the key. The phone buzzed on the counter. Karen's name lit up the screen. Of course, I answered. What do you want? Her voice came sharp and controlled. Mike, we've reviewed your refusal to pay. If you don't remit the fee immediately, we'll have no choice but to file a lien. You're leaving us no room. You're leaving out something I said. Something important. That's not how this works, she snapped. Your property is part of the association. You use HOA Shoreline. You pay the fee. That's the rule. I looked down at my father's underlined words. Shoreline shall remain in the Harper title. Funny, I said, because 3 documents sitting in front of me say otherwise. Deed county map and an amendment you've apparently never seen. A beat of silence. Then tight. What amendment? The one that reaffirms private ownership of the entire shoreline, I said. The one you should have checked before threatening my home. You're bluffing. No, I said. I'm finally reading the fine print, and you're trying to sell me what I already own. Another silence, longer this time, heavier. Somewhere behind her I heard papers shifting, the faintest click of a pen dropped on a desk. Mike, she said carefully, whatever you think you have, it's not what I think I cut in. It's what the record shows. I heard her inhale. Not confident, not combative. Something closer to fear or a scrambling calculation. You charged me for land I own entirely, I said. For a moment she didn't speak at all. Not a breath, not a sigh, not even a muttered protest. Just silence, cold and perfect. I let it hang there, the weight of the truth settling into place. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its edge. We'll review your materials. You do that, I said. I set the phone down beside the documents, the kitchen suddenly quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Dwyer leaned forward, looking at the amendment like it was a relic pulled from the earth. There it is, he murmured. The thing she can't outrun. I nodded, feeling something shift inside me, not just hope, but certainty. For the first time since the HOA came after me, I wasn't reacting. I was standing on solid ground. The shoreline was mine. It always had been. The clubhouse had never been this full. Folding chairs lined the walls, residents stood shoulder to shoulder near the doors, and the old ceiling fans hummed like they were preparing for takeoff. At the front, a single microphone sat on a wobbling stand next to a projector someone must have borrowed from the high school. Every seat on the HOA board was filled, and Karen sat at the center chin, lifted eyes forward, wearing a smile that didn't reach anything real. She tapped her folder once, then leaned into the mic. The hearing will come to order. Today, we finalize the $80,000 access assessment against Mr. Harper for unauthorized use of HOA Shoreline. A ripple passed through the room. Some nods, some raised brows. A few people exchanged glances like they weren't quite comfortable with how confidently she said finalize. Karen continued, "This assessment has been reviewed thoroughly. We expect to close this matter today." I waited, hands folded on the table in front of me. The projector remote sat beside my thumb, prop number 3, ready to fire. Behind me, a new voice said quietly, "I'll speak when it's time." I turned just enough to see Officer Ramirez from the county. He gave a slight nod. Mentor number 3 had arrived. Karen gestured toward me. "Mr. Harper, you may respond before we proceed with the fee implementation." I stepped to the mic. "Actually, I said I'd like to start with some facts." Karen smirked. "You've already sent us your interpretations." "No," I said. "Not interpretations. Documents." I clicked the remote. The projector flickered to life with the county map, Ramirez's map, the shoreline circling my lot in bold red. A murmur swept through the room. "This," I said, "is the original county boundary record for Lake Heron properties. You'll notice. Lot 17. I tapped the screen encompasses the entire shoreline curve behind my home. Karen leaned toward her mic. "Those maps are outdated." Another click. My deed appeared magnified so the signatures and stamps filled the wall. "This is my deed," I continued. "Filed with the county. Same boundaries, same shoreline." Whispers grew louder. Someone muttered, "That looks official." Another, "Why didn't the HOA check that?" Karen stiffened. "Mr. Harper is cherry-picking." I clicked again. The amendment unfolded on the screen, my father's handwriting enlarged for all to see. "Shoreline shall remain in the Harper title." Gasps. Even the fans seemed to pause. I said, "This amendment was recorded and reaffirmed. It predates the HOA. It predates all shoreline policies. It verifies that the HOA never had jurisdiction over the waterfront behind my property." Karen shot up from her chair. That amendment is ancient, irrelevant, and privately held. This meeting concerns current HOA authority. A man near the aisle shouted, "You charged him 80 grand without checking ownership." Another voice followed. We were told the HOA owned the whole shoreline. Karen held up her hands, trying to steady the room. "Everyone, calm down. These old documents don't reflect." Ramirez stood. The room stilled. He walked to the front, adjusted his badge, and spoke clearly into the mic. "As the county records officer for this district, I can confirm these documents are legitimate. They are the controlling legal instruments for Lot 17. The shoreline is privately owned by Mr. Harper. It has never transferred to the HOA." The crowd erupted, voices overlapping, shocked, angry, vindicated. Someone clapped once loud, like a judge striking a gavel. Karen paled. That can't be correct. Our bylaws." "Your bylaws," Ramirez said, "cannot supersede title deeds or county-recorded amendments. Any fee you attempted to impose for shoreline access is invalid." I watched Karen's mouth open, close open again, searching for footing that wasn't there. Wallace, the HOA president, leaned away from her as if trying not to be associated with whatever she was sinking into. "This isn't possible," she whispered, but the microphone amplified every crack in her voice. Someone near the back yelled, "So he never owed a dime." Another added, "You made up the fee." A third, $80,000 for land he owns. The room had turned, not subtly, not gradually, all at once like a tide snapping direction. I looked at Karen. For the first time since this began, she looked small, not powerful, not untouchable, just someone staring at the truth she'd hoped would stay buried. Facts weren't rude, facts were inconvenient. She stepped back from the table. We need a recess." But no one moved to grant it, not the board, not the audience, not even Wallace. The crowd kept buzzing louder now, angrier. People were literally standing up for me, as if the room itself had been waiting for someone to pull the curtain down on the lie they'd all been living under. Ramirez turned to me. "You did the right thing coming forward with this. Don't back down now." I nodded once. When I turned back toward the crowd, I saw neighbors who had never spoken to me, raising their eyebrows, shaking their heads in disbelief, pointing at Karen like the story had rewritten itself in real time. And we were only halfway through the hearing. Wallace cleared his throat like he was about to swallow a bone. "All right," he said, voice shaky into the mic. "Given what we've just heard from the county, the board is going to, perform a rapid audit of the shoreline records." Someone in the crowd snorted. "Now you audit." Another board member, a woman with reading glasses on a chain, leaned into her mic. "If the shoreline isn't HOA property." She looked down the table, then back at Ramirez. "What else isn't?" That landed like a hammer. The room went quiet again. Ramirez set his folder on the table. "Your CC&Rs and any supposed transfer of deeded rights should match county records. If they don't, you have a problem." Wallace motioned to the small printer on a cart behind them. "Print everything we have on shoreline jurisdiction. Now." The secretary scrambled to a laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. The printer whirred to life, zzzt, zzzt, beep, spitting out page after page. Wallace and the other board members grabbed sheets as they landed, flipping, scanning, whispering. Karen hovered behind them, hands clenched at her sides. "These are the maps I've been using," she said. They show shaded usage zones." The woman with the glasses interrupted, tapping a page. "Not ownership. There is no recorded transfer here, no deed, no easement, nothing." "That can't be right," Karen said. "We've always treated the shoreline as common." Ramirez pointed at the pile of papers. "Treating it as common doesn't make it yours. A transfer would be recorded with the county. There isn't one." A guy in the third row stood up. "So, we paid higher dues for shoreline maintenance you didn't control. Sit down." "Tom?" Karen snapped. "No," he said. "I'm not sitting down." His phone was already in his hand camera, pointed toward the table. Around the room, screens lit up as others followed his lead. The woman with the glasses removed them completely, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Wallace," she said, "these invoices, She held up a copy of my $80,000 bill. On what basis did we approve this? Wallace looked 10 years older than he had at the start of the meeting. Karen presented it as consistent with past practice. I didn't see the underlying title records. That's not an answer, someone muttered. Ramirez slid one of his own documents forward. For the record, the county has never conveyed the shoreline behind Lot 17 to the HOA. There is no legal foundation for this assessment. My heartbeat slowed just a little, replaced by something heavier, but calmer. The panic of the last few weeks was being peeled away one line of text at a time. Karen straightened, pushing past the board to grab a stack of papers. These guidelines have been in our handbook for years. I didn't invent them. If there's a mistake, it started before me. Old guidelines aren't deeds, Ramirez said. They don't create property you can charge for. A woman near the front raised her hand, angry color in her cheeks. You told us the shoreline was association-owned. You said that at the barbecue last summer. Karen ignored her. We acted on information that was provided to us. If there's blame, it belongs to whoever drafted these policies. So, you charged me $80,000, I said, based on a rumor in a binder. Her eyes flashed. We acted in good faith. You sent a final notice threatening to lien my house, I said. Over land you never owned. There's nothing good about that. Wallace rubbed his temples, then picked up the mic with both hands like it might run away if he didn't. All right, he said. We need to vote. Karen spun on him. We are not voting on this in the middle of a mob scene. We created the scene, the woman with the glasses said quietly. The least we can do is fix what we can see. She looked out at the room, motioned to rescind the $80,000 shoreline access assessment against Mr. Harper, effective immediately on the grounds that the HOA never possessed ownership of the shoreline in question. I, second one of the other board members, said instantly. Karen's head whipped toward him. You can't just— Yes, we can, he replied. We have to. Wallace swallowed. All in favor, hands went up down the board table. 1, 2, 3. He hesitated, then lifted his own. 4. Every eye in the room turned to Karen. She didn't raise her hand. Opposed? Wallace asked weakly. Karen's hand shot up like a spear. Opposed. This is premature. This is motion carries, Wallace said, voice shaking. 4-1. Assessment rescinded. For a second there was no sound. Then the room exploded applause. Cheers, a few shouted curses, half of it directed at Karen, half just raw release of pressure that had been building for years. Ramirez raised his voice just enough to cut through. And for clarity, you can't charge for land you don't own. The line hit like a punchline that also happened to be a verdict. People repeated it under their breath, then louder. You can't charge for land you don't own. Did you hear that Karen Wallace lifted the mic again? Additionally, he said I move that the board issue a written and verbal apology to Mr. Harper for the invalid assessment and any undue stress caused. Second, the glasses woman said. The vote was faster this time. Unanimous. Even Karen didn't try to block it. She just stared at the table like the wood grain might offer her an escape route. I'm sorry, Mr. Harper Wallace said, turning toward me. On behalf of the board, we apologize. This never should have happened. Phones were up everywhere now, recording every word. I didn't say anything. I just nodded once. The apology wasn't enough, not for the weeks of worry, the nights staring at my ceiling, but it was something, and this time it was public. Karen suddenly pushed back from the table. The chair screeched against the floor. This is a witch hunt, she snapped. You're all overreacting. We followed precedent. Precedent built on nothing, the glasses woman said. Karen grabbed her folder, knocking over a styrofoam cup in the process. Coffee splashed across the agenda sheets. She didn't stop to wipe it up. I won't sit here and be humiliated, she said. You did that yourself, someone called from the back. Board meltdown. Laughter broke out rough and sharp. Karen shot one last venomous look at me, then marched toward the exit. As she passed, the door swung open and a dozen phones angled to capture her storming out. Flash icons flickered. Screens glowed. The door slammed behind her with a hollow thud. For a moment, all I could hear was the ringing echo and the faint, relentless whir of the little printer still churning out useless shoreline policies into a tray nobody was going to pick up. 3 months after the hearing, Lake Heron looked exactly the same and completely different. The water still lay flat in the early light, a sheet of glass broken only by the occasional ring of a fish breaking the surface. The same thin veil of fog hugged the far bank. The same old dock boards creaked under my boots. But there was no threat hanging over any of it. No invoice. No 10-day deadline. No question about who had the right to walk down this path. Halfway down the slope behind my house, a small wooden sign stood where the gravel met the first planks of the dock. I'd sanded and stained it myself, burned the letters in with a cheap wood burner from the hardware store. Private Shoreline. Harper title. Nothing fancy. Just a statement of fact. I stopped there every morning now, coffee in hand, more out of habit than paranoia. The sign felt less like a warning to anyone else and more like a reminder to me this used to be the thing they tried to take. Behind me, I heard the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. Morning, Mike Dwyer called. Figured I'd find you down here. I turned. He was bundled in an old jacket cap pulled low, hands tucked into his pockets against the chill. "Hey, Hank," I said. "You're up early. Old men and bad knees don't sleep in," he said. "Besides, I wanted to see that sign in the morning light." He nodded toward it, squinting. "Looks good. Your dad would have liked that." "I think so," I said quietly. We walked to the water's edge together. The lake lapped gently against the pilings. The sound was small but steady, like breathing. "You think it's really over?" he asked. "The fee?" I nodded. "Yeah. County ruling board vote. Written apology. They'd have to be suicidal to come after me again." He huffed. "Didn't stop them the first time. That was before we dragged the records into the light," I said. "Now, everybody knows where the lines really are." We stood there for a minute in comfortable silence. A duck cut a wake through the fog near the far shore. Somewhere up the hill, a screen door squeaked and banged shut. "You hear Karen moved?" Dwyer asked. "I heard," I said. "Out by Ashford, right? That's the rumor. New board's already talking about rewriting half the handbook." He smiled faintly. "With the county's help this time." I took a sip of coffee. "Probably a good idea." He nudged me with his elbow. "Speaking of the new board, you know they're going to ask you again. Ask me what to join," he said. "Sit on some committee, be the guy with the maps." I snorted. I spend my days crawling into wrecked cars and telling people to breathe. I'm not signing up to argue about mailbox heights. "Maybe not," he said. "But they could use someone who knows that HOA power isn't law unless folks let it be." I looked down the curve of the shoreline. My shoreline. The red line from the old map lived in my head now. I could see it tracing the edge of the water, tying the land and the documents and my father's handwriting together into one unbroken loop. "Yesterday," I said, "Wallace stopped me at the mailbox." "Yeah, he said they're forming a governance and records committee. Wants me on it." "What did you tell him? That I'd rather keep my weekends," I said. "But if they ever have a question about deeds or maps, I'll sit at the table and walk them through it. As a consultant, not a politician." Dwyer chuckled. "Legal counsel without the billable hours." Something like that. He watched the water a long moment. "You know, he said there are folks around here who think you just stirred up trouble." "I know," I said. "They're not wrong. I stirred it up. I just didn't start it." He gave me a sideways look. "You regret it." I thought about the first envelope, the red final notice, the night staring at the ceiling with numbers and worst-case scenarios spinning in my head. I thought about Karen at the mic saying I only owned what they let me use. I thought about my father's underlined words about Ramirez standing up in that packed clubhouse and saying, "You can't charge for land you don't own." And I thought about the board vote, the apology, the way the room shifted when the facts finally landed. "No," I said. "I don't regret it." He nodded, satisfied. "They tried charging me for access," I added, "but I owned the whole shoreline." Dwyer laughed softly. "That's a hell of a story when you say it out loud." "Yeah," I said. "Some battles aren't won by louder voices, but by older documents. That's one for the bulletin board," he said. We started back up the path. Near the top, 2 of my neighbors were waiting Tom from Lot 19 and a woman named Elise I'd only ever waved to before all this. "Hey, Mike," Tom said. "Got a minute?" "Sure," I said. Elise held a folder to her chest. "We're putting together that new committee, records, procedures, making sure this kind of thing never happens again," Tom added. "We really want you on it. You know the system better than anyone now." I shook my head. "I appreciate it. I really do. But I'm better off as the guy you call when something smells off, not the guy sitting in this room every month." Elise looked disappointed. "You sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "I'll look at anything you send me. I'll come in when you need me for the technical stuff. I don't want to live in meetings. I already did my tour." Tom smiled. Finally, someone fought back. "I guess we can't argue with the results." "You can argue," I said. "Just make sure you've got the paperwork to back it up." They laughed, and some of the tightness in my chest eased. These people weren't just faces on the other side of a dispute anymore. They were neighbors who'd seen how bad it could get and didn't want to go back. After they left, I walked once more down to the water alone. The sun had made it over the ridge now, turning the fog a soft gold. The little sign at the path cast a short shadow across the gravel. I reached down and straightened it out of habit fingertips, brushing the engraved letters. Private Shoreline. Harper title. This fight had started with an invoice and a threat. It had run through county offices and packed hearings and one woman's determination to make her power bigger than the law would allow. It ended here quietly, with a simple truth standing where everyone could see it. I stepped onto the dock. The boards groaned in the familiar way they always had. The lake moved under me steady and unbothered, like it hadn't noticed any of this. The worry was gone now. The anger, too. What was left was something simpler: space and light and the feeling of solid ground under my feet where I'd almost let someone convince me I was trespassing. I stood at the water's edge until the sun was fully up, warming my face, and let the last of it go. The posted county order still hangs on the clubhouse wall, its seal catching the morning light as I walk past the quiet gate toward my shoreline, the same ground they once tried to bill me for. The community remembers that hearing. The facts pressed harder than any voice, and justice didn't shout, it landed. What stayed with me is simple boundaries matter. Documents matter, and when people stand together, power can't twist what's written in plain ink. Justice isn't loud, it's steady. And if my story teaches anything, it's that speaking up with evidence can steady a whole neighborhood.